Previously on the accidental history of the Night Elves, we discovered their origins, how they came to be some of the most powerful magic users in all of Azeroth, their connection to nature, and how their kingdom became arguably one of the greatest to ever exist. Not just that, but how their kingdom fell apart. And so here we are in part 2. Thank you once again for joining me on this little adventure. Are we ready to learn all about the world trees and bring the Night Elves all the way up to the present day? Let's dive in. The survivors of this event came back to nature and druidism and began to rebuild their culture around it. Led by Malfurion, they came to Mount Hyjal, and they actually wanted to create a new well there. The dragons had been watching over the elves for many years at this point, and they were quite perturbed by the fact that they wanted to make another well, potentially full of the same arcane power, and potentially they feared that it would cause the Legion to return to the world and cause the same amount of destruction. So with the dragons, the elves made a pact. They would create the well, but an enchanted tree would be planted above it to mask its energies from anyone who might try and cause harm. This enchanted acorn that was planted was the very first world tree, and its name was Nordrassil. The tree was blessed by the dragon aspects, who tied the Night Elf's strength and vitality to the tree. And what this meant was that as long as the tree existed, the elves would be immortal. At this point, they were also reconnecting with their moon goddess Elune. Mostly they had strayed away from the path during all the upheaval and magic usage, which turned them away from her guidance and her light. At this point, the time period called the Long Vigil began, and this is when the priestess Tyrande Whisperwind became their leader, and she would lead them for many thousands of years after that. In fact, she's still the Night Elves' leader to this day. During this vigil, they did come into some conflict with a few Highborn that survived the Great Sundering. The Highborn wanted to assimilate, but they were still addicted to the magic and they craved it. Their leader, Dathramar, didn't really like that magic was not welcome in Night Elf society anymore, and after some conflict, he and his followers were exiled from the land. The elves who followed him became known as the High Elves, and they founded the land of Quel'Thalas. I made a short about it if you're interested in learning a bit more. But from the High Elves then came the Blood Elves, which we know in-game today. But as a result of this conflict, the Night Elves withdrew from the world completely, and they surrounded their lands with an impenetrable mist. Occasionally they did show themselves, like during the War of the Shifting Sands against the Kiraji. The Kiraji are insecty-type beings who are also ancient and have lived on Azeroth for a very, very long time. Eventually, though, after many thousands of years, actually during the Third War, the existence of the Night Elves was finally revealed. This happened when orcs who were fleeing from conflict in the Eastern Kingdoms landed in Ashenvale and started depleting its resources. The Legion and the Scourge then started attacking Night Elf lands at this point, and the elves remained hostile to basically everyone. Horde, alliance expeditions, they were very much their own faction still at this point. This all came to a head at the Battle of Mount Hyjal, when the Night Elves finally did ally themselves with the mortal races that live on Azeroth, to basically save the world. At this point, the demon Archimonde launched an attack on Nordrassil, and it was decided that the dragon's blessings on the tree and the elves should be sacrificed to save Azeroth. To make this sacrifice, Malfurion summoned the spirit wisps of past Night Elves to attack Archimonde, and he was defeated. Nordrassil was heavily damaged, but the world was saved, and as a result of the tree being damaged, the Night Elves lost their immortality. Nordrassil would eventually and very slowly start to heal, but the Archdruid Fandral Staghelm wanted to plant a new world tree. There was some opposition to this idea, but the planting did go ahead. It was decided that this second world tree would be planted off the northwest coast of the Kalimdor continent, and this was the world tree known as Teldrassil. Perhaps now you're wondering, new world tree, immortality is back with the Night Elves and they can live forever again. That's not the case. It turns out that Teldrassil was in fact corrupted and was not blessed by the dragons, and so while the elves did have a tree to call home once again, they were as mortal as any other race. In any case, on the world tree of Teldrassil, they established the great city of Darnassus. It was built in the boughs of the tree, towering high above everything on the mainland. There were some villages near the roots of the tree though, like Rutharan. Up until this point, as I mentioned before, the Night Elves had been very isolated, self-sufficient and incredibly wary of other races. But over time, they eventually associated themselves with the Alliance, although their druids are still counted as neutral and they will train anybody, Horde, Alliance or other neutral races from across Azeroth. The Night Elves have also since reconciled with magic users. A group of exiled highborn called the Chendralar pled with Tyrande to be brought back into society, and they were cautiously welcomed, and the use of magic has slowly worked its way back into Night Elf culture. They've also taken in Worgen refugees from Gilneas after their city was overtaken by the Forsaken of the Horde. And just in general, the Night Elves have been pretty reliable members of the Alliance across several conflicts. And then, the War of Thorns happened. The majority of this battle was between the Horde and the Alliance, trying to take possession of northern Kalimdor. This was part of the Battle for Azeroth expansion. And Ashenvale and Darkshore, which are Night Elf lands, were major battlegrounds. The leader of the Forsaken and the Horde at this point, Sylvanas Windrunner, wanted to capture Teldrassil and occupy Darnassus. Basically, long story, it's to do with possession of a mineral called azurite. I'm not going to go into that in this video. Too long, it'll be way too long. This came to a head when Sylvanas gave the order to burn Teldrassil down. And they did, along with every civilian who couldn't make it out in time. And as a result, in-game right now, Teldrassil is just a smoking, burning husk off the coast of Darkshore, like a spectre or a silhouette, and it's completely inaccessible by anybody. The surviving Night Elves became refugees, and they fled to Stormwind, Azure Mist Island, which is where the Draenei landed for the first time, and some even went back to Mount Hyjal. A small group of elves rebelled and they actually became Druids of the Flame, led by Fandral Staghelm, but that's another video, I think. The spirits of those lost to the burning of Teldrassil were sent to the Maw. The Maw is basically an afterlife for irredeemable souls. But eventually they were saved and sent to Ardenweald instead, which is the part of the afterlife that is saved for servants of nature. Side note, I'm not a huge fan of Shadowlands, but Ardenweald is the best zone. It's absolutely gorgeous. The moon goddess Elune actually possessed Tyranda's body and shed a tear for all those who were lost. And together with the Winter Queen, who rules Ardenweald, they called it the Sister's Tear. That tear was infused with the souls of all the lost Night Elves, because at that point the Winter Queen gave them a choice to remain there and rest, or become part of a new beginning for their people. Most of the Night Elf souls chose the latter, and the tear became a seed. That seed was planted in the Emerald Dream, which is like a plane of existence reserved for druids normally, and there it could grow in safety. And there in the Emerald Dream it sprouted, grew tall, and became the new third world tree, Amirdrassil. Now, by the end of the most recent expansion, Dragonflight, the tree Amirdrassil has manifested in the real world. And it looks like it's set to be planted off the coast of the Dragon Isles, which will help renew the bond of the elves with the dragons themselves. It's not a full city yet, but from what I know of patch 10.2.5, there are a few buildings popping up, and it looks like it'll grow into a full major city over time. And that's it! A brief-ish history of the Night Elves that brought us all the way from their beginnings to the present day and their third world tree. Now, there is some controversy around this, and I would really like to know what you think. If you're a Night Elf player, or not, or if you've been through the story and you have some thoughts about how this has all turned out. Because the Night Elves, the kaldorei, are tied to Kalimdor, those are their lands, and their new world tree, the third world tree, is off on the other side of the world, on a completely different continent. Kalimdor is left to the Horde. I don't think there are any Alliance cities there now. What does this mean for the Night Elf Society going forward? I really don't know, it's all up in the air, but I would love to know what you think. Where do you think the Night Elves are going from here? They've had a lot of lore dedicated to them in the last few years, and it's glad to see it all come back round and for them to have a brand new city and a place to stay and to call their own. I would really love to know what you think about the latest patch, if you found this story interesting, whatever comments and ideas you might have. Leave them down below. I love reading them and replying to you all whenever I can. In the meantime though, please like this video and subscribe if you haven't. It means the world to me as always. And I'll see you in the next video.